This video shows the process I used to change the high pressure fuel pump cam follower on an Audi A3 1.6 FSi. This is a 2003 model. Please note that although I qualified as a mechanic 20 odd years ago, I've not been in the trade for quite a long time. The process I've used may not be the process that Audi recommend. Please use this video just for information purposes only. If in any doubt, please consult a qualified mechanic. The first step is to remove the engine cover stroke airbox. Before we can do this, we need to remove the air inlet, which clips to a little bracket behind the grille. Then there is a electric sensor cable, which I think is the air temperature sensor, and there's also a breather hose as well. So remove those three, and then I was able to wiggle the airbox stroke engine cover off by pulling it up. There are two rubber mounts at the back and two rubber mounts at the front. Once the engine cover is off, you will see the fuel pump right in the middle, mounted on the rear cam cover, which is the inlet cam cover. There are 4 bolts holding it to the cam cover. These had, I think, 5mm Allen heads. There are 3 pipes attached to it. One is the fuel, I think the fuel inlet, which has a 14mm hexagon nut on it, and 2 banjo connections, which were probably a Torx 12-point Torx once, but mine was slightly different. I'll get to that a little bit later. There is also an electrical connection for either an actuator or a sensor, which needs to be removed. I covered the throttle intake to prevent anything falling in. That connector went to the airbox. This connector was quite easy to remove. Like most of the Audi ones, there's a little tab on the back, and if you pull that back, you can see that it releases a little clip, and then it should just pull straight off. Next, I'm going to crack off what I believe is the fuel inlet, the lower pressure side of the pump. I used a 14mm open-ended spanner and covered the pump with a rag just in case there was any residual fuel pressure in there and it was going to squirt. I then tried to remove the pipe before realising it was clamped via a little bracket to the inlet manifold. To undo the bolt on the inlet manifold, you need to lift a wiring loom out the way. So here I am lifting the wiring loom or pipe or whatever it was, I can't remember actually. Actually looking at that, it might have been maybe the water return pipe for the expansion tank. Unclip that, and then I could use a 5mm Allen key to undo the retaining bolt for the little bracket holding the fuel inlet pipe on. Once the bolt is removed, I was then able to pull the pipe back out, or the nipple end of the pipe back out of the pump, and it was then free. The next task is to remove the 2 high pressure banjo connections. However, as I'm sure you can see from the photos, mine, which should have been 12-point hex, were completely ruined. Someone has stripped them out at some point. As it happens, a 6mm Allen key fitted perfectly, so I'm assuming that someone didn't have a 12-point hex and beat a Allen key into it, and then took them off like that last time. Anyway, here I am undoing the banjo bolts using the 6mm Allen key. They came away quite easily, thankfully. They hadn't been murdered up. I was quite surprised there was no fuel pressure or, built up, so nothing leaked out, nothing more than a dribble anyway. The next task is to undo the 4 main bolts. I think they were M5 hexagon or Allen keys. So took 2 of the bolts fully out, and then was almost fully wound in the 3rd one out when I thought actually probably a good idea to check whether the pump's going to move or not. As it happens, it was in there quite firm, so I got a hammer, a rubber mallet hammer, and gave it a little tap until it came loose. It did require quite a bit of a tap. I didn't know how long it had been in there, whether the O-ring had was bound up or not, but I kept tapping it either side just a little bit, work one side then work the other side, and until eventually it cracked off, and then from that point I was then able to undo the both of the bolts holding it on. Once the bolts are out, I was able to give it a little wiggle and a jiggle while trying to pull it out from the bore that it sits in. It did require quite a little bit of wiggling. I guess the O-ring was quite dry, but once it was out, it was quite easy. So put it aside, then give the bore a little bit of a clean out with a bit of paper towel, try and soak some of the oil out, and then it's a case of trying to get the cam follower bucket out with your fingers. It was a little bit difficult. I think I resorted to using a small screwdriver just to give it a little bit of a move. Very careful, didn't want to scratch the bore, scratch the cam or anything. And then eventually it started to move and I was able to draw it out. And now you can see that it's worn right through. It's completely hollow. It should have a cap on the end, which probably means the plunger from the fuel pump has worn away the cam. And as you can see, it's certainly marked the cam. So obviously we're concerned that there'll be swarth from the possibly a little bit of the cam lobe and also from the follower itself throughout the engine, certainly in the sump and possibly the pickup. Once we had collected a new follower from Audi, the next job was to check the bore in there, make sure everything was nice and clean. Then I used some SAE30. Back in the day I'd have probably used cam lube, but I didn't have any cam lube, so I just used the thickest oil that I could find in my garage. Hopefully this will do the job. Give it a good coating all the way round the follower, tops, bottom, side, everywhere to give it a fighting chance. Also probably I think I poked my finger down the bore a little bit, if I remember. Yeah, just to make sure that that's well lubricated as well. And then it's just a case of popping the follower back in carefully, making sure you don't score the sides or anything like that. It was a very snug fit, if I recall. I think once I got it perfectly lined up it did go in quite well. Obviously we're aware that at some point the camshaft is going to need to be changed. At the same time that we change the camshaft, we're also going to need to change the follower again. So the next task is to remove the O-ring from the fuel pump. So pop the O-ring off with a small screwdriver, being very careful not to score any of the machine surfaces, because we don't want a track for oil to follow. And then I got the replacement O-ring, which is a genuine from Audi. And I make sure that I give this a little coat of the SAE30 oil, and likewise need to make sure that the pump will also, the mounting for the pump will also be coated in oil, and also make sure the bore itself is coated in oil. We don't want to score anything as we put it in. We want to make sure that the O-ring is lubricated so it doesn't catch up. And who knows, I might need to get this out one day, so I don't want it to be absolutely stuck in there. I'm just removing a bit of excess oil there, but as long as there's oil around the O-ring and the bore and the machine surface, cylindrical surface, then carefully place it in, give it a little wiggle and make sure it's fully home. Next job is to bolt the fuel pump onto the cam carrier using the 4 long bolts. I don't tighten them up fully, just give them a little pinch at this time until the fuel hoses are in. Next up is to attach the fuel inlet hose and tighten that up, followed by the 2 high pressure hoses with the banjo connections. There's a high likelihood that everything that bolts into the fuel pump, because it's aluminium, have a specific torque settings. I haven't got access to this at the moment, so I just used my experience and gave everything what I felt to be the right kind of pinch. After that, the fuel inlet bracket can be put into place and tightened up with the single Allen key bolt. And finally clip the coolant overflow pipe back in place on the inlet manifold. I hope you found this video informative. Please remember, I am not currently in the trade, so the process is the process I used may not be the process that Audi prescribe. Please do your research and make sure if you do change your high pressure fuel pump cam follower that you follow the process that Audi state. Thanks for watching.